Welcome to Meeple Arts, a discussion of visual design for board games. I am Greg Grimsby, and let's get started with episode 5. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Meeple Arts. I'm excited to have a wonderful guest today. Matt's going to introduce himself and talk about some of his amazing work, and then we're going to dive in and talk about graphic design. All right. Go ahead, Matt.
Hi, my name is Matt Paquette. I am a graphic designer. I run a small studio here in Ottawa, Ontario, and we have 2 designers on staff. We predominantly work in the tabletop industry. In the last 5 or 6 years, we've worked on about 70 or 80 titles, and we have a small grouping of regular clients that we work with, publishing houses, people like AEG, Elf Creek Games, Skybound, 25th Century, and a few others. Some titles that I guess we've worked on. Some better known ones would be Mariposas recently.
Awesome.
What else? Looking at my collection here. Call to Adventure with Brotherwise Games is the one that's been getting some notoriety.
I got that back there somewhere.
Nice. So before that, I was in the museums sector. I worked at a financial museum here in Ottawa and did that for about 7 years. And even before that, I was in high tech. So
awesome. Now, I'm intrigued, Matt, to always ask folks, how do they make that jump into board games? Because there's so many different stories, right? I'd love to hear how that happened for you.
Yeah, well, I mean, as a graphic designer, as any graphic designer has the option to and the ability to is do freelance work on the side. Not every profession can do that. Not every, you can't, if you're a professor like you are, for instance, you can't just like freelance professor or teach things on the side, as easily as somebody who can just work by the hour.
Yeah, definitely.
It's more of an involved thing for if you were to teach something on the side. So that being said, in my professional life as a designer, I've always done stuff on the side. I for the longest time, because I have a background in restaurants, I bartended and served for 20 years in restaurants. And we have a burger chain here in Ontario that I worked at for a long time and ended up doing over 1,000 graphic design projects with them on the side of my main gig, and even as a main gig for a while, when I had left one place and wasn't ready to go back into the grind of the 9 to 5. So I was working at the museum one day, and my colleague, who was very much into board games, modern board games, said, "Hey, we're going to have some people over to our house on Saturday. Do you want to come over and play?" And I was like, "No, I'm good, thanks." And I'd grown up playing Dungeons and Dragons since I was about 10 years old, and
yeah, man,
and stuff like that. I love games in general. I got introduced to Talisman when I was about 13 or 14.
Right? Yeah.
I loved that game a lot. Actually, I came home. It was in Montreal. I was visiting a friend of mine in Montreal. We played it. I came home like, I gotta get this game, and I bought the base game plus a couple of expansions. It was awesome. So. He came and asked me, this colleague came and asked me again a few weeks later or a couple months later, and said, "We're having some people again over to our place. You want to come over?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah, sure. Why not? I'm not busy on Saturday." So that was a 10-hour day and say 7 or 8 games, the rule sets of 7 or 8 games crammed into my head. And I kind of left there just spent. Physically, mentally, emotionally spent.
Gamer hangover.
Yeah, really. And it was certainly I think it was a very what do they call those moments? It was a very seminal moment for me, and a watershed moment. That's what I wanted to say. So that was the beginning of the end, as they say. So I was working at the museum, and I ended up just making I made some player aids for myself. I made stuff
Mm.
like I think one of the first things I made was um, player mats for Boss Monster. Brotherwise is now a client of mine, actually, and then I made a board, a player or a game board for the DC deck building game,
Yeah. Cool.
and then a few other things like some stuff for Power Grid and whatever. So then I'm like, you know what? Maybe I should reach out to some companies about doing it for, make some money out of this. So I picked a whole bunch of publishers that I really liked their stuff and kind of
Mm.
sent off some. I mean, I developed a pretty decent portfolio of non-game stuff, and luckily I did have some game stuff too, because we made a fair amount of games at the museum for school groups that came in. So that was a bonus. I was able to show some game experience, not necessarily retail or consumer games, but educational ones. And then uh, as I started collecting more and more work from this freelance gig, it became, I was almost to the point where I was working two full-time jobs.
Mm.
So something had to give because I couldn't maintain that, and my day job gave. So this became my day job, and here we are.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, I mean, not losing the day job, but that you had something that you could
Yeah,
become your plan A
yeah,
that you really enjoyed. Super.
yeah.
Um, here's a question, and I don't know if you'll be able to think back this far, but as a graphic designer, how would you critique board game graphic design, before the modern board game came about? So we're talking like that switch around the Catan and Ticket to Ride time. Uh, could you think about some of those earlier games and put your finger on like how modern games have potentially, maybe this is not the right answer, potentially really kind of improved the way that they think about graphic design?
Well, I think one thing that has really allowed designers to level up the level of quality that they're giving, and not even quality, but just the options of new media being a canvas for them. Like, for instance, back in the day, any bifold or folded board has that divot or that ditch down the
Mm.
center, right? Like a Monopoly board would have, for instance. But now a lot of these Euro boards and a lot of the modern boards have done away with that, because they're able to, because of the technology that printing companies have now and things like that, you're able to take advantage of a lot of this technological advance, and that means, that in general just kind of bumps it up a level.
Mm.
But I think as far as art goes, the sheer, I mean, because of how accessible these tools are to consumers now
Mm.
that have talent, like you get, these weekend warriors or these people that don't do um, illustration or whatever it is as a full-time job, but they're still really good at it. They can go to the store, pick up a tablet, and make some amazing art.
Mm.
So the ability to include stuff like that in a game has leveled it up.
Yeah, yeah.
So you gone are the days of having camera ready art, right? Where it's like, I mean, there's a lot of people probably watching this that have no idea what that actually means. You don't, but when Monopoly was first made, people were doing paste up,
Mm.
right?
Dang.
So
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
actually an amazing documentary I just watched not too long ago called Graphic Means, and it's all about the history of graphic design over the last number of decades. Highly, you can get it on, you can download it for you can buy it for $20, or you can rent it for like $5 or something like that. I highly recommend it to anybody. that is interested in any of this stuff.
Awesome.
Um,
I'll try to get
but
the link for that and put it in with the
yeah,
video here so people can
yeah.
track it down.
There's also another documentary I watched right after that one is all about Canadian graphic design, but we'll talk about that later.
Very specific niche.
Yeah, yeah. We'll talk about that, like the Roots logo and stuff like that, but that's fine. So yeah, just these just the accessibility of all of this wonderful technology and tools that that you no longer have consumer and professional at these divergent ends. You have this kind of gray area in between where a previous employer of mine called them prosumers. Right?
Yeah.
So
definitely, yeah. And I think that gives us a good segue to talk about very specifically some of your contemporary work. I'm going to switch over to the concept board, and I've got a bunch of projects that you've worked on here. And I'll let you kind of guide the conversation here in terms of which ones of these you want to talk about.
Yeah. So this particular game was the last one I worked on with TMG, and I worked on a couple of them with a couple of games with TMG. And this was like the third pirate game I'd worked on in a row, I think. Which it's weird how that happens, but
that's awesome.
And the second one with TMG, to be honest. But anyways, so we ended up figuring out, like, they had an illustrator on the project, and I hooked up with them to do the design layer for the game. And excuse me, we had John Brieger on as the game developer or game designer, sorry. So I had a vision for this, but I knew, like, I'm not an illustrator by trade, so I had a vision for what I wanted to do, and I could probably pull it off, but it would take me a hell of a lot longer than somebody who's actually got some chops in this area. So I have an illustrator that I work with named Joey Julian, and he's out of Colorado. Him and I have done a number of projects together, and we work really well because I end up wireframing all of this stuff. I should have included some sketches in here, but I'll sketch it out. We'll have a call. I'll say, this is kind of what I'm looking for. And he sketches it up, and it's 9 times out of 10, it's like bang on. We worked exactly that way for Merchants of the Dark Road, which I did with Elf Creed Games. That's going to be coming out later this year. At Gen Con, they'll have a few copies for sale, actually.
No, that's exciting.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to do for this one in particular was kind of the art was very vibrant looking and things. So I didn't want to upstage the art too much. So I tried to go really very kind of naturally iconic for the iconography and the tokens and on all that stuff. So I just wanted to keep it simple and kind of give everything the same treatment of like that wood carved look.
Yeah. One thing that I find that in board game design, you see this tug of war between embellishment and kind of cleaner style. And sometimes you could say that maybe a board game is over embellished and some of the information is a little hard to see. And then you might have the other end of the spectrum where, man, the cards just feel like they could use a little more oomph, a little bit more texture, not texture and literal texture, but just some more character. How do you navigate that continuum? Because there's a continuum in there that can still be successful, but you as the graphic designer, you have a sense of kind of like where you want to land with any particular component or the whole project. Yeah, I would love for you to verbalize how you wrestle with that tug of war.
So there's a lot to unpack in that. There's a lot of yeah, exactly. There's a lot of contributing factors that determine how I think what kind of style that would be appropriate for a particular game.
Mm.
The first and foremost is like, what kind of game is it? Is it, you're not gonna take and get full. You could, but I don't. It would be a waste of money. Is to take get full art for something like Cards Against Humanity.
Right.
You
Yeah. Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
you could illustrate all the different concepts on that. Why would you want to?
Mm-hmm.
There's what predominantly, like historically, how is the publisher, is there a common look and feel to this publisher's games? Do they tend to favor one style versus another, more complex versus more simplistic?
Mm-hmm.
What is the artist doing? How is their art going to be projected and presented on these components, and how much information is there on the components? Is the art allowed to shine? Is it going to be or is it like in this case, is it going to be a half and half kind of thing? So, and then I think as one of my rules of thumb is balance. I mean, everything needs to be balanced, and you don't want to. I mean, while everybody loves production value, overproducing something has a detrimental effect. So you don't want to go too far. And I'd rather go too far and pull it back than not go far enough.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, if you don't go far enough, your work might look amateurish or just
Yeah.
not all the way there. But if you
But
get
for,
to
I mean, for certain things like icons, 100% of the time, I start with something very simplistic, one color. Like if you scroll down on this,
oh yeah,
so these icons is pretty much where I start.
mm-hmm.
And if they don't need anything else, I don't do anything else, because these icons may need to be used in line in text.
Mm-hmm.
These icons, sure, they look good when they're 20 millimeters in diameter. How about 5?
Yeah.
How do they look then? Are they legible? Oh, there's a letter on these. Like you don't want to represent or recreate what Yu-Gi-Oh cards do. It's like a 3.5 point font, right? So you really,
Definitely.
I think, and as I'm aging, I'm losing my eyesight, right? So you gotta, and I don't play games as often as I would like, and when I do play games, it's often in a dimly lit pub. So or at home when it's with mood lighting or whatever, when you have your friends over and you want to get whatever, and you don't want it to be like an operating room. So I much prefer that, and if that's the case, then you got to kind of pay attention to things like contrast, like typographic characteristics that will really promote legibility.
Definitely. I have the cards kind of zoomed in here because there's what I think is a great example down there on the bottom of the card of embellishment. You have what looks like maybe it's like the mast with like its eye hooks, and that doesn't need to be there. You could have just decided to just go canvas all the way down, but you made the choice that you wanted to add this in theme embellishment, and I think it looks great. How do those kind of embellishments happen? Or is it just like, what it would be cool if, or are you just inspired by the theme?
So in this particular case, you'll see there's 2 kinds of cards here. We have the one with the nice blue skies at the bottom and the completely intact sail.
Yep.
And then the one on its left, on to the right of the screen, you have the tattered sail with a bit of a darker, stormy background. Yeah. So, sometimes it's just like, hey, something, we have some white space here. What can we put there to fill that white space? Or maybe just as often it's like, no, the white space is good because it's so busy everywhere else.
Mm.
But in this particular instance, we had two types of events. There was or actions where there was stable and unstable actions. So we need,
Mm.
you have the stable seas, which is the nice blue sky, and then the unstable ones, which is this kind of tattered and torn and stormy nights. So at a quick glance, you're able to determine which is which.
That's awesome. I thought it was pure embellishment, but now that you're describing it, there's a mechanism behind it. So that's great.
Yeah.
It actually, it justifies its existence beyond just being embellishment.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, like that's a big thing, right? Is if why is this there?
Hmm.
Artistic license? Sometimes that works, but most of the time it's like, especially when it comes to games, um, there's a lot of economy of space going on, and you really have to. Your real estate is very, nobody wants to pay for 5 punch boards, but when you can do it in 3.
Yeah, yeah. I don't want to pay to get that manufactured either.
Exactly, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So you have a lot of other cool work here, and I want to make sure that we, hit the kind of important beats. We were talking before we started recording here, and you mentioned the idea that you see a lot of projects where perhaps there's a little bit of a struggle with continuity
Yeah.
across the components and across the people producing work. Obviously, this is all your work, and therefore it's great. So, not examples of that here, but yeah, I would love to have a conversation about the idea of
Sure.
continuity across all this, and I'll just zoom in on something that's cool because it's got that little guy there. He's awesome.
Honestly, I'm still scratching my head behind the inspiration for a lot of the art for this game. I wouldn't change one pixel of it, but it's certainly uh, comes from an inspired place. I'll just say that. But yeah, so I remember working on, not actually, I remember playing a game um, at the AEG play or test house when I was up there last, and it was a prototype, but it was a fairly far along prototype design wise, visuals wise. And I noticed, I mean, I'm not going to name the game, but I noticed that um, all of the components were like fantastically done because the graphic designer, I've worked with them before and they're great. But I did notice a little bit of drift as far as a cohesive theme goes to. So some of the components, while being really well done and in an ecosystem of their own, are fine, but when taken in the snapshot of everything else, they looked a bit too different and maybe a too much of a black sheep and not one of the family.
Hmm.
I find a lot of games suffer from this because it's really, I mean, when you're as a designer, you get close to working on something and you get this 6-inch view versus the 10,000-foot view that you want to have to see the whole snapshot.
Hmm.
And it's very easy to get kind of those blinders on when you're working stuff, and I fall victim to it all the time. That's why I don't do any spell checking, because I'm horrible at it, because I get too close to something. And to really try and take those steps back and look at it and say, okay, so here's all my stuff. What I do a lot of the time is I open up a huge document in InDesign, and I just toss all the different components on there, and I just sit back and look at it, make it big on my screen, and I look at it. I'm like, okay, is there anything that's sticking out like a sore thumb here?
Hmm.
And then sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes you want stuff to stick out like a sore thumb, but still have characteristics where it's like, yeah, it's definitely the the ugly stepsister of this thing, but it's definitely part of the family. And you might want something to stick out for a very good reason. What if it's a token that's going to be on the table that needs to communicate status of your player, and that's the linchpin of the mechanic of the game. You want that to be the first thing people see. Well, then it makes sense for it to be like completely standoutish, but still have it part of the family.
So Matt, how do you approach graphic design on a project where you're not the designer, but yet you are reliant on understanding how the game works and what information is needed when, what needs to be
Mm-hmm.
legible on the table versus what's going to be in my hand? How does that understanding happen? I'm assuming you have to play the game. Do you have any suggestions about how to make sure that you're emphasizing the right information when you're doing your work?
Sure. Well, you say that you assume you'd have to play the game. I didn't make that assumption when I first started doing this. And that was a mistake.
Hmm.
Uh, you know, I think any graphic designer, like, see, it's unfortunate. This industry, I'm no longer the designer. Um,
Yeah,
so,
it's all right. It's all good.
anytime a graphic designer takes on a game project and dives right in without playing the game, without understanding how the game is played, how the components are used, is doing not only themselves but the client a disservice, in my opinion.
Hmm.
Because you can gather a lot of really valuable intel by playing a game. The first time out, when I'm playing a game as a in a leisure activity, not even just working on it, if I'm at a pub playing a game for the first time, my first plays go horribly wrong most of the time, because I'm not, my head's not playing the game. My head's, half of my head is playing the game, and the other half is auditing and critiquing how things are done, right? And not just that, but part of it is taking notes on, oh, they do this really well. Let's let me try and do this too. So I should do this in the next project or something like that. So I mean, bar none, I start off by, if I'm meeting with a client, it's like, is this a game I want to work on? Is this, I'm very fortunate to be in the position right now that we have pretty full dance card for the next foreseeable future. Awesome. And then any new projects that come along, yeah, it's amazing. Especially since Chris has come on board, we're now 2 full-time designers in the studio. So it's to be able to keep both of us busy is fantastic. But as new projects come along, that affords us the ability to kind of say, is this a good match for us? Would we be able to do this game adequate service? So that's the first question we have to answer. The second question is, if it's a yes, second question is like, okay, when can we get a playthrough going? And the one of the positives about this whole shelter in place thing with the whole pandemic is that Tabletopia, Tabletop Simulator, and all those virtual environments have become really a lot more popular and a necessity in a lot of cases. So whereas before you'd have to get a physical prototype sent out to you, like I did for Merchants of the Dark Road, pre-pandemic, umpteen games that I've worked on since then during the pandemic, it's like, yeah, let's hop on Tabletop Simulator, we can run you through it. Fantastic. Yeah,
that's awesome.
And so, and then again, I mean, living where I live, I'm not able to hop in a car and drive down to the client's house or place of business to play this game. We're very far apart. So get that play going, understand how the game works. And as soon as I do that, I'm taking notes about all the different components. I get home and I have a form that I have on my, like a Google form that I do one of those forms. I fill that form out once for every type of component that is in the game, and that kind of populates my project management system. And then yeah, so from there it's just get your hands on the prototype materials, have another conversation about, I've played the game already, so I kind of know what information is important, but sometimes when the prototypes are made, they're not as forward thinking about that stuff. They're concerned about other things, rightfully so. A designer can't have their finger in all the pies. So it's part of our job to ask these questions about, what information is more vital than other information. So yes, and then once we get all that info, you kind of cobble that into some rough concepts, and once those get approved, any other further illustration that is required, and then you kind of proceed iteratively from there until you get a finished product.
Awesome. I have the Jurassic Parts game up right now.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was the photo shoot or if it's the actual components, but it definitely feels like there is a wonderful, like, warm palette going on here with the kind of gold transparent nuggets and the sandy colors and the leather. Where does that direction come from? And I guess that probably speaks to maybe the structure of the team. Is that coming from the graphic designer? Is that coming from potentially an art director? Or no matter what, where it comes from, how does that work out through all the game components so you avoid what you notice on some projects where it just isn't cohesive?
So one step that I did kind of leave out that I probably should have mentioned is between the getting to design and understanding how the game is played, there's a pretty big step that we take, which is because a lot of the time you won't have an art director on the project. You'll have the publisher, you'll have the business owner, the game designer, whoever it is. Apart from the artists, we're pretty much the only other visually creative service provider or the only other person that has a visually creative role in this process involved in a project. So you get companies like Asmodee that do have this larger infrastructure where they do have art directors that weigh in on these projects. But so we voluntarily take on as part of our process the role of art director a lot of the time, which involves kind of having a conversation with the client, asking what their inspiration is, what they see, and then kind of going back to our office, doing the research, looking what else is out there, doing a comparative analysis, and then putting together a mood board of textiles, fonts, imagery, whatever it is. And it could be even broken down into multiple, smaller mood boards for different components, depending on how large the game is. For this, we're thinking, for this component, we're thinking this, for this one, we're thinking this, and so on and so forth. So that we kind of give them thematically a place to go mentally so that they can, travel there without having to see concepts, actual designed concepts.
Yeah, that's very much working in the vein of an art director. It sounds like the graphic designer in that vacuum of visual direction, and plus the graphic designer is going to be the one ultimately that assembles this all together and all these disparate parts and gets it printed. So, you're the ultimate stakeholder. So I could see that happening a lot.
Yeah, but for this game in particular, the look and feel of this game started and kind of grew from Andrew Bosley, who is the artist on this game. He also did Everdell and Merchants of the Dark Road and a whack ton of other amazing projects. So he came up with this very warm cover. If you're going to be in the desert, if you're going to be, you're going to have this type of feel to it, right? It's almost like the Indiana Jones kind of Jurassic Park kind of thing. So, but that was kind of the start. So they, canvas, wood, some metal stuff, whatever it is, just all leather, all the textures you'd think to see in a I wouldn't say it actually a realistic dig, but a cinematic realistic dig,
Yeah.
we could say, right? It's kind of what we all go to in our mind's eye.
Mm-hmm.
And this particular photo shoot, I had bought online that chisel, and I bought the hammer, the rock hammer.
Awesome.
And I went to Fabricland and I got the canvas.
So good.
So I gave all of that to my buddy Ryan, who's an excellent game designer as well, and here in Ottawa. And I said, "Can you do something with all this stuff and do a photo shoot?" And this is what we're looking to get done. So he did a amazing job with on a few games, photos for a few games for me, so that kind of just carried forward the theme of this dig, get the canvas tints and so on and so forth.
I love the way the palette is so limited into that warm range that it then allows these little paper notes. I guess one color per player board. Like they really jump out.
Yeah.
And that's a wonderful benefit of really controlling your gamut and your palette. It then allows you as the designer to go, and you were saying this before, this is important. Boom, let's use this color that we haven't used before.
Yeah.
That still harmonizes, and we're really going to draw your eye to this so you don't lose this information. I see it so well done here.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. No, it's really difficult. Like I'm working on we just kind of had a meeting with a client yesterday about a game, and the game board has these 4 quadrants, and each one has a color associated with it. Plus there are 4 players that have colors associated with them. But above and beyond just having a color, there's really no requirement for the players to really, you're not going to have, there's no pieces on the board, identical pieces on the board in the player color. So we determined that we don't even need to make the players different colors, which made it a little more simple. Speaking of noise, as you were talking about earlier, trying to reduce that noise if you don't need it.
With the Night of the Ninja, these are super clean cards. They're just like graphic and crisp and gradients. What are some of the highlights from a graphic design point of view that you hit here with this particular game?
So I think that begs for a little small story about how the art was created for this game.
Yeah, let's do it.
I'm gonna see if I can find sorry, bear with me for 1 second. I should have had this queued up.
And these are more great photos, more wonderful photo shoots.
Same photographer, yeah. So I had another friend of mine who is he's a martial artist, and he had all of this weaponry. So I'm like, can I borrow your katana and your sai and stuff? He's like, yeah, sure, have at it.
It's always nice to have a ninja friend.
Yeah, really. Just don't tick them off. So all the art on this game is actually not digitally created. Well, sorry, it's digitally created, but it's implemented. These are actually shadow boxes. These are multi-layer, lit with different colors, shadow boxes.
The cover, it seems really apparent that layering is happening.
Yeah.
That's striking.
It is. And this is all analog stuff. And unreal to see the implementation of this. There's a video, if I can just get it going here. There's a video that shows maybe I'll have to show later anyways. A video that shows the, oh, here it is behind the scenes. So, is there a way for me to share my screen on this?
We'll make it happen. We're doing this on the fly, folks. um, can you share your screen? If you're on the main Zoom meeting, you have a
There we
share
go.
screen button.
Yeah, I do.
I always wonder if it's been turned on, if the permissions have been set.
Sorry to hijack this like this.
No, that's fine. And we'll see if it actually comes up, because right now we're still seeing
Okay, yeah. There we go. And here we go. Is that coming up?
Yes, it is showing. Awesome.
Okay, so here we go. This is one of the shadow boxes.
That is so cool. What was the original design? Like, why do you do this? Like, someone was really intrigued by this as a concept, and they made it happen, and they wanted to apply it to this game.
So, yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why I love working with Brotherwise Games is they're always looking for these really neat ways of doing things. And the funny part is about it that if you didn't know, because amazing art in games is so commonplace now, you don't ask the questions, how was this created? How was, what was the drive behind this? But Chris and Johnny at Brotherwise, they're always trying to think about, oh, this would be really neat to do this way. There's another artist they were thinking about working with that does all of these amazing pen and ink illustrations, but then goes over it with gold or silver markers. Yeah. And they really get this amazing sheen to stuff. So I'm not sure what the process was, like the thought process was behind the whole project, but once they told me how things were created, it certainly drove, okay, well, if that's the case, we're going to scale the look and feel of all the other stuff that we're going to do back so that this art can really kind of come full forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's evident in just the white or mostly white field down at the bottom.
Yeah,
not a lot of embellishment there. You're forefronting the art because it's just so good.
Yeah, and then for this project in particular, I worked mostly as an art director on it, and we worked with a graphic designer out of Sweden. Her name is Stephanie Gustafsson, and she's done a lot of really fantastic work with us as well.
Yeah, I just love the look of this in particular. I did want to navigate towards the kind of wrapping this up.
Yeah,
Matt, I did want to try to maybe kind of get one more maybe tip or trick from you. And as we talked about before we started, I don't mean to belittle or demean with that phrase tip or trick. For me, what that means is, as a practicing artist, we have internalized something in our artistic journey. And this is how we wrap our head around a concept, a visual concept.
Yeah.
And that's how we execute it in our work. And in that comes these really kind of distilled ideas that we always come back to as visual artists, that we are kind of thinking and checklisting in our brain as we're engaging with the design. So if I could tease just maybe one more of those kind of nuggets for you, that'd be awesome.
So one thing, I mean, as a graphic designer, there's a lot of the process that I go through that is repetitive. I find myself doing similar or identical effects to something on other projects. It's like, hey, this worked really well for this game or this project. I'm going to try it again for this one. And it could be, something that takes 5 minutes, or it could be something that takes, I remember the first time I had to do transparent cards for kind of like Mystic Veil type cards. That requires a white layer to be laid down before you lay down all of the CMYK layers on top. So I had to come up with figuring out how to do that. Did it, sent them off to print. The client came back, said, okay, this is great. We need to make some changes though. And I'm like, oh, dang, I can't remember how to do this. I didn't take notes. So I had to rebuild the process. And I took notes and I documented as I went. So now if I need to go back, I do that. So I think finding these ways to economize your workflow has been essential for me, whether it's creating actions in Photoshop, whether it's finding certain go-to fonts. And I mean, every designer has these go-to fonts that because they work, and you don't have to worry about, like, I can't tell you how many hours I spend looking for fonts. Because as a designer, I have this particular, I mean, it's the bar is set quite high. No, not quite good enough. It's like, well, fonts are fonts, right? No, they're not.
No.
So finding these ways to really economize the stuff you do every day and document it and get to know those processes so that they can be done without having to expend too much effort into either relearning them or tweaking them too much, so that it leaves you more time to be creative. I remember going to Photoshop World in Boston one year, and Dave Cross, who works for I don't know if he's still there, but he's at photoshop.com. And one of the things that he says, he's like, listen, people always say when it comes to the Adobe apps, I don't have time to learn that. He's like, sure you do. Experiment for 30 seconds at a time. Hey, what does this filter do? Oh, that's neat. Okay. Go back to what you were doing. Tomorrow, do it again, or this afternoon, do it again. So that's what I try and do too, is I try and, delve into those other areas of these tools that I'm using. What does this exactly do? And then if it can maybe apply to what I want, then I'll research it some more. I want to have at a later date, but yeah.
I'm going to play off of that because I think that's so good. One thing, when I do my freelance work, oftentimes I won't work on a project for a couple of weeks or months, and then I'll have to dive back in on that project. And I won't remember my process. And it's what you're saying, like, how did you get that white back there? And so, because I do a lot of screen recording, and I think we all do a lot of screen casting these days, I've gotten in the habit of just recording a video. So if I do something really particular with my art production, I just record a video and I say, hey, future Greg, when you forget how to do this, this is how you did this. You did this and this and this and this. And then I can go back and watch my video.
I will have to remember that. I like that because, that's great.
And then you don't have to
that's
remember
a great idea.
That one checkbox, or, oh, I had to set this for fill, or I had to, whatever. But I love that idea of we fall back on these ways of working, and sometimes our workflows are very specific and exacting, and it's easy to kind of forget some of that nuance.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, I really appreciate your joining me today. I feel that we could spend a whole nother episode talking about fonts, and I was really tempted to just start going on a segue about fonts because they have so much power to communicate mood and feel. But I'll resist the urge to do that. But thank you so much for your time. And I'm sure our audience would like to be able to see more of your work. Where could they reach you on on the internet, and I'll put these into the video notes as well.
Yeah.
And if there's a project that you want to make sure that we talk about here before we wrap up, we'll definitely give you some time to point some flashing lights at what's new and coming out soon.
Awesome. Well, they can find me. I'm on Facebook. Matt Paquette Co. is the company name, and mattpaquette.com is our website, newly redesigned in the last little while. And I think we have an Instagram account too, but that's one thing on my 2020, 21, 2022 to-do list is to get more social activity. Got some really great projects. I'm just looking at my board here. Some really great projects coming up. Merchants of the Dark Road is coming out soon. They will have some copies at Gen Con to sell, very limited amount by Elf Creek Games, booth 2561, I think they're at. And we've got a bunch of projects in the works with AEG, Brotherwise Games, Skybound Games, Floodgates. We're working on a new expansion to Sagrada. And yeah, so it'll be the third in the Facades series. There was Passion, then Life, and then this one is going to be Glory. So
that sounds glorious.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Matt, for your time today and your expertise.
Thanks,
it was great to chat with you. And thank you for everyone watching and joining us today as we discuss visual design for board games. Until next time, make great art. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Matt, for being our guest. If you have any feedback or questions, please email me at greg@meeplearts.com and visit the website meeplearts.com. Thanks for watching.